The ballroom of the Al-Zahir Hotel glittered like molten gold. Crystal chandeliers bathed the marble floor in light. Waiters glided between tables, and the air was heavy with the scent of expensive oud. It was the annual gala of the Al-Zahir Group, the empire that ruled real estate, oil and luxury hotels across the Middle East. At the center table sat Omar Al-Zahir, the 30-year-old Arab CEO known for his arrogance as much as his success. His watch alone cost more than most people earned in a year. His face was handsome, but cold, the kind that smiled only when others bowed. Investors, diplomats, and journalists surrounded him, hanging on his every word. He was used to it. After all, in his world, power was respect, and humility was weakness. That's when Aaliyah Johnson walked in, a young waitress, tall and graceful, with deep brown skin and eyes that held both exhaustion and quiet strength. Originally from Nigeria, she had come to Dubai chasing opportunity. But tonight, she was just part of the hotel's temporary staff, blending into the glitter of a world that barely noticed her. Carrying a tray of sparkling glasses, Aaliyah approached Omar's table. Her hands were steady, her steps careful. But as she leaned forward to serve, one of the guests shifted his chair, and the glass tipped over, spilling water across the CEO's sleeve. The room froze. You could almost hear the silence tighten around them. Omar looked down at his soaked cuff, then slowly lifted his eyes toward her. When he spoke, his voice was low but laced with venom. Ya Allah, can't you even hold a glass properly? Are you that stupid? A few guests laughed softly. Others looked away. Aliyah's heart sank. Her throat tightened as humiliation burned behind her eyes. She had heard worse before. The whispers, the looks, the judgments. But something in her snapped this time. Maybe it was the smirk on his face. Or maybe it was the years of staying silent. She straightened her back, her eyes locked on his, and in perfect fluent Arabic she replied, "Al-ihtiram la yuqas bil-mal, ya Sayyid Al-Zahir. Yuqas bikayfa ta'amil man hum ad'af minka." Respect is not measured by wealth, Mr. Al-Zahir. It is measured by how you treat those weaker than you. The air in the room shifted. Every conversation stopped. The laughter died. Omar's expression froze, the arrogance draining from his face. He hadn't expected her, a waitress, a black woman, to speak his own language, let alone with such grace and fire. For the first time in a long while, Omar Al-Zahir felt small. For a long, unbearable moment, the ballroom was silent. Every face turned toward the woman who had dared to speak back. Omar's fingers tightened around the stem of his wine glass, knuckles whitening. His jaw flexed, but no words came out. He wanted to shout, to humiliate her the way she had just humiliated him. But something in her eyes stopped him. They weren't fearful. They weren't pleading. They were calm. That calmness disturbed him more than her words. The guests quickly turned their attention elsewhere. The orchestra began to play again, trying to wash away the awkwardness. But Omar barely heard it. Her voice, the tone, the fluency, the confidence, replayed in his mind like an echo that refused to fade. He muttered under his breath, "A waitress, speaking Arabic like that." As Aliyah quietly stepped back from the table, he caught a glimpse of the name tag pinned to her black uniform. Aliyah J, service staff. Something about her name felt familiar, but he couldn't place it. She disappeared into the crowd, her figure swallowed by the glittering chaos of the gala. Omar leaned back in his chair, but his appetite was gone. All he could think about was the sting of those words. He was a man who commanded respect wherever he went. People bowed, smiled, obeyed. Yet in a single sentence, that woman had stripped him of his armor. After the event, his assistant approached. "Sir, should I have her dismissed?" Omar looked at him blankly. "Dismissed? That would be easy. Too easy." "No," he finally said, voice low. "Find out who she is." Meanwhile, in the back kitchen, Aliyah leaned against the wall, trembling. She hadn't planned to speak. She never did. Her hands still shook from the rush of adrenaline. She whispered to herself, "Why did I do that?" But deep down she knew why. She'd spent years working under people who looked at her like she was less. Too dark, too foreign, too poor. Yet tonight, when Omar Al-Zahir had called her stupid, something inside her refused to stay silent. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The scent of oud and champagne lingered in the air, mixing with the heat of the kitchen. Her mind drifted back to a dusty classroom in Lagos, the one where she had first learned Arabic from her father, an imam who used to tell her, "Language is power, Aliyah. When you speak a man's tongue, you hold a mirror to his soul." Her father's voice echoed in her heart. He had died 5 years ago before she left for Dubai. She had promised herself she would never forget his lessons, especially that one. But what she didn't know was that Omar had already ordered her file from HR. And when his assistant returned later that night, holding a printed report, Omar read the line that made his brow furrow in disbelief. Bachelor's degree in Arabic literature, University of Cairo. His glass paused mid-air. The insult he had thrown suddenly burned in his throat. Who was this woman really? The next morning, the sun spilled over the glass towers of Dubai like molten silver. From his office on the 52nd floor, Omar Al-Zahir stood before the skyline, the city that mirrored his pride. But today that pride felt bruised. He hadn't slept much. The echo of that woman's voice had followed him into his dreams. Respect is not measured by wealth. Each word had carved a crack in his certainty, a wound he couldn't explain. He stared down at the printed file on his desk again. Alia Johnson, age 27, nationality, Nigerian, degree, Arabic literature, University of Cairo. Languages, English, Arabic, French, temporary hotel staff. It didn't make sense. Why would a woman with such education work as a waitress? Why here, in his hotel? His assistant entered quietly. Sir, the woman you asked about, she's in the staff cafeteria downstairs. Should I? Omar cut him off. No, I'll go myself. The assistant blinked. Sir, you... But Omar was already walking out the door. Downstairs, the cafeteria buzzed with chatter. Cleaners, cooks and servers laughing over breakfast. Aliyah sat alone in a corner, reading something on her phone, earphones in. Her hair was tied back and the exhaustion in her eyes was softened by a quiet grace. When the door opened and Omar walked in, the room fell silent. Every employee froze, confused, unsure if they should stand. He walked straight to her table. Aliyah looked up and startled, then calm again. Her expression didn't show fear, only a question. Mr. Al-Zahir, she said softly, removing her earphones. He studied her for a moment, trying to find the arrogance he thought he saw last night. But there was none, just dignity. You speak Arabic fluently, he began, his tone measured. Where did you learn it? She hesitated, then said, From my father. He was an imam. He believed that understanding another person's language means understanding their heart. Something flickered in Omar's eyes, something that almost looked like guilt. But he hid it quickly. You have a degree, he said. From Cairo. Why are you working here? Serving tables? Aliyah's smile was faint but sincere. Because sometimes life doesn't care about your degree, she replied. I needed to survive. I applied for a translator's job, but the position was filled. The hotel offered me this instead. I took it. Her voice didn't tremble. There was no shame in it, only truth. Omar leaned back slightly, arms crossed. You could have just ignored me last night. She looked straight into his eyes. I could have, but I've ignored too many things in my life. Mr. Al-Zahir, silence helps the powerful, not the powerless. For a second, he didn't breathe. Her words struck again. Clean, sharp, impossible to dismiss. The cafeteria was silent. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to fade. Finally, Omar said, You're very bold for someone in your position. Aliyah tilted her head slightly. And you're very proud for someone in yours. It wasn't defiance, it was balance. For the first time, he realized she wasn't trying to humiliate him. She was simply refusing to be small. As he turned to leave, his reflection flashed against the glass door. And for once, he didn't see the powerful CEO. He saw a man who had just been taught a lesson by someone the world would never notice. Omar couldn't focus for the rest of the day. He answered, voice low. Yes? Then his expression darkened. What, hospital? Which one? He turned back to Aliyah, eyes suddenly distant. I have to go, he said, already moving toward the door. Aliyah watched him leave, her heart oddly heavy. She didn't know it yet, but that phone call would tie their fates closer than either of them could imagine. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and silence. Omar walked through the white corridors, his footsteps echoing against the cold tiles. For the first time in years, he wasn't surrounded by assistants or bodyguards, just his own thoughts, and the uneasy rhythm of his heartbeat. In the private ward, his mother, Layla Al-Zahir, lay in bed, her skin pale, her breathing shallow. Machines beeped softly beside her. She looked smaller than he remembered. He whispered, taking her hand. Her eyes opened slowly, and when she saw him, she smiled faintly. Omar, you came. He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. Of course I did. They said you fainted. It's the heart again, she said, voice weak but steady. Don't look so worried. Allah gives and takes as He wills. He forced a smile, but his mind spun. She was the only person who could quiet the storm inside him. She had raised him after his father died, teaching him humility he'd long since forgotten. Then she said something that froze him. I met someone yesterday, she murmured, her eyes distant. A kind young woman. She brought me water while I was praying in the mosque near the hotel. Her name was Aliyah. Omar's breath caught. Did you say Aliyah? Layla smiled. Yes, such a beautiful heart. She reminded me of your father's old friend from Nigeria, Imam Abdul Karim. She said she was his daughter. Omar sank into the chair beside her, the realization hitting him like a wave. It wasn't fate. It was a circle closing. The girl he insulted was the daughter of the man his father once called brother. Later that night, as rain streaked the hospital windows, Omar stood by the vending machine staring at his reflection. His tie was loose, his eyes tired. He didn't look like a billionaire anymore, just a son afraid of losing his mother. That's when he heard a familiar voice behind him. Mr. Al-Zahir? He turned. Aliyah stood there, dressed in a simple abaya, holding a thermos. I brought some tea for your mother, she said softly. She asked me to come by. For a moment, he couldn't speak. The same woman he had humiliated was now here, caring for the only person he truly loved. He took a deep breath. You didn't have to, he said quietly. She smiled faintly. Maybe not, but kindness isn't something I do because I have to. The simplicity of her words disarmed him. No bitterness, no anger, just grace. They walked back to his mother's room together. Layla's face lit up when she saw Aliyah. You came, dear. Aliyah poured tea into a small cup and helped her sit up. Her movements were gentle, practiced, the kind that come from caring for others before yourself. Omar watched silently, an ache rising in his chest. For the first time, he saw what his father must have seen in her father. That same dignity born of faith, not status. When Aliyah left the room later, Omar followed her into the hallway. Aliyah, he said, his voice lower than before. I owe you something. She turned, brow raised. What's that? He hesitated, then said, an apology. But before she could answer, a nurse came rushing past them. Mr. Al-Zahir, your mother, her heart rate's dropping. Omar spun around and ran, the hallway filled with alarms. And as Aliyah followed behind, her hands trembling, she whispered a prayer in Arabic. Ya Allah, don't let him lose her tonight. The steady beeping of the heart monitor turned erratic. Then one long piercing tone. Omar's world stopped. Ummi, he shouted, rushing to her bedside. Doctors and nurses swarmed the room. He stood frozen as they performed CPR, shouting medical orders in Arabic and English, the air thick with panic. His mind went blank. For years, he had negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking. But now, a single fragile heartbeat held him hostage. Aliyah stood near the doorway, her hands clasped, eyes closed. She whispered verses softly under her breath, tears glistening but steady. Come on, Ummi. Omar muttered, voice cracking. He had never begged before, not anyone, not even God. But in that moment, every ounce of arrogance melted away. After what felt like eternity, the machine beeped again. Once, then again. A weak rhythm appeared on the monitor. His mother's chest rose, then fell. She's back, one of the doctors said. Her pulse is faint but stable. Omar pressed a trembling hand over his face, shoulders shaking. He didn't realize he was crying until he felt Aliyah's hand on his arm. She's still here, she said softly. Be grateful. You got another chance. He turned toward her, eyes red. Thank you, he whispered, though he wasn't even sure if he was thanking her, God or fate itself. Hours later, the room was calm again. The machines hummed gently, and Layla slept peacefully. Omar sat in the chair beside her, exhausted, head bowed. He looked up when he heard the rustle of fabric. Aliyah was still there, adjusting the blanket over Layla's legs. You should rest, she said quietly. It's been a long night. He shook his head. I can't. I thought I'd lost her. Aliyah nodded slowly. I know that feeling. I lost my father the same way. One minute he was reading Quran, the next. Her voice trailed off, eyes clouding with memory. Omar studied her face. The pain, the calm acceptance that came with it. He realized she carried more strength than anyone he'd ever met. You prayed for her, he said. She smiled faintly. We all pray when love is on the line. Mr. Al-Zahir, even those who think they don't believe anymore, that line hit him harder than she knew. He had stopped believing, not just in God, but in people. Somewhere between money and pride, he'd lost his way. For the first time, he didn't want to be the man everyone feared. He wanted to be the kind his mother prayed for. A long silence stretched between them, not awkward, but heavy with understanding. Then Aliyah stood. I should go. I have an early shift. Omar rose too. I'll have my driver drop you. She shook her head. No need, I'll walk. He frowned. At this hour? It's almost dawn. I like the quiet, she said, smiling gently. It's when the world listens. And before he could argue, she slipped out of the room, her soft footsteps fading down the hall. Omar watched her go, the weight in his chest both painful and strange. Somewhere deep inside, something had shifted. For years, he had believed power came from control. Now he was beginning to see it came from compassion. And the woman who had shown him that walked away before sunrise. The next morning, Dubai shimmered under a pale gold sun. Omar hadn't left the hospital. He sat by the window of his mother's room, staring at the city below, the same city that had always bowed before him. But now it looked different. Layla Al-Zahir was recovering, her heartbeat steady once more. When she opened her eyes and saw her son still sitting there, she smiled weakly. "You didn't go home?" He shook his head. "I didn't want to." "You look tired," she whispered. "And softer." "That's good." He smiled faintly. "You make it sound like an insult." She chuckled, then reached for his hand. "Omar, power means nothing if your heart can't kneel in gratitude. Remember that." Her words lingered long after she drifted back to sleep. 2 days later, Omar returned to the hotel. The staff froze as he entered the lobby, unsure which version of him they were getting today, the cold tycoon or the man who'd stormed out that night. But this time he didn't bark orders. He simply asked, "Where's Aaliyah Johnson?" They pointed him toward the small cafe section of the hotel, where she was arranging flowers at the counter. When she saw him approach, surprise flickered across her face, quickly masked by calm professionalism. "Mr. Al-Zahir," she greeted. "How's your mother?" "She's stable," he replied. "Thanks to you." Aaliyah shook her head. "Not me. God listens when hearts break loud enough." He smiled, a quiet, unguarded smile that made her pause. He looked different, not just in expression but in presence. "I wanted to thank you properly," he said, "and to apologize again for that night. I was cruel." "You were human," she said softly. "Arrogant, maybe, but human." He laughed under his breath. "You're not supposed to make it easier for me." "I'm not," she said. "I just learned not to hold anger too long. It poisons the wrong person." There was something in her tone. Forgiveness without surrender. It humbled him. He gestured toward the table. "Can I buy you coffee?" She hesitated. "You? Buy me coffee? That sounds like a headline." He grinned. "Then let's make it one worth reading." They sat across from each other, the clink of cups and murmur of guests filling the space between them. It wasn't awkward. It was honest. He told her about growing up under a father whose generosity embarrassed him, and a mother who prayed for his humility. She told him about leaving Nigeria with a suitcase and a promise to make her father proud no matter where she ended up. When he asked why she didn't return home, she looked out the window. "Because I haven't finished what I came here to do," she said. "And what's that?" "To remind people like you that kindness still matters," she replied with a faint smile. Her words hung in the air, not heavy, not sharp, just true. Omar found himself laughing softly, something rare for him. For the first time in years, he wasn't performing. He wasn't a CEO. He was just a man having coffee with a woman who made the world feel simpler. When she stood to leave, he said, "Aaliyah, can I see you again?" She paused, then smiled gently. "You already are." "Mr. Al-Zahir, the question is, will you see yourself differently next time?" And just like that, she walked away, leaving him sitting there with a half-empty cup and a heart that suddenly felt full. 2 weeks passed. The news of Layla Al-Zahir's recovery spread quietly among the company, and so did whispers of something else, the CEO's change. The once feared Omar Al-Zahir had begun showing up early, greeting staff by name, even smiling. Rumors floated through the offices like perfume. "Did you hear? He thanked the janitor yesterday." Impossible. "I saw it myself." But it wasn't a rumor. It was real. And every small act of kindness felt like him trying to make amends with a world he had ignored too long. One afternoon, he was walking through the hotel's main hall when he spotted Aaliyah carrying a tray toward a group of guests, foreign investors. Loud and impatient, he stopped instinctively, watching. One of the men, a European delegate with too much arrogance and too little respect, snapped his fingers. "Hey, you! More wine, quickly." Aaliyah nodded politely and turned, but as she placed a new glass on the table, the man leaned back and muttered to his friend, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Look at that skin. Beautiful, but wasted on service work." A few others laughed. Omar's jaw tightened. Before he could think, he strode forward. "Excuse me," he said, voice calm but cutting. "Is that how you speak to my staff?" The table went silent. The delegate blinked. "I didn't mean—" "Then choose your words better next time." Omar said sharply. You're in my hotel, and here we treat people with dignity. Alia's eyes widened. For a moment, she saw the man who had once humiliated her, now defending her in front of everyone. The room buzzed with murmurs as Omar turned to her. You're doing excellent work, Alia. Thank you, he said, loud enough for the entire hall to hear. She nodded slowly, speechless. But not everyone in the room was pleased. Across the lobby, one of the hotel's PR managers, Samia, watched with narrowed eyes. She had always adored Omar, or rather his power. Seeing him treat a waitress with such respect ignited something darker. That evening, social media caught fire. A leaked video of the Omar-Waitress confrontation went viral, but twisted. The caption read, Arab CEO caught defending his secret girlfriend. Hotel staff speaks out. The story spread within hours. By morning, tabloids from Dubai to Cairo ran with it. Love below the glass ceiling. Billionaire's affair with hotel waitress? Omar's phone buzzed nonstop. Calls, messages, board members demanding statements, investors demanding explanations. He stormed into the PR office, slamming the newspaper down. Who leaked this? Everyone looked away. Alia, meanwhile, sat alone in her small rented room, scrolling through the hateful comments, the racism, the mockery, the disbelief. She's using him. Typical gold digger. Black and Arab? Impossible. She turned off her phone and buried her face in her hands. She had faced humiliation before, but this felt different, because it wasn't just about her color or her job. It was about truth. That night, Omar showed up outside her building. His car idled quietly on the narrow street. When she stepped outside and saw him, her eyes hardened. You shouldn't be here, she said. You'll only make it worse. He shook his head. I don't care about headlines. You should, she said bitterly. You live in them. I don't. Omar stepped closer, his voice lower now. Then let me use them to tell the truth. Alia looked up at him. The man who once saw her as invisible now standing before her, ready to risk his name. And somewhere deep inside, between pain and disbelief, she began to realize that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't pity. It was respect. By sunrise, the scandal had reached every major business channel. Omar's name trended across the Gulf, not as the ruthless CEO, but as the Arab billionaire in love with his black waitress. The story twisted facts beyond recognition, feeding on stereotypes and lies. The board of Al-Zahir Group held an emergency meeting. 12 men sat around a glass table, their expressions ranging from concern to contempt. Mr. Al-Zahir, one of them began, the situation is damaging our brand. Investors are calling this reckless behavior. Omar stood at the head of the table, silent for a long moment. Then he said, reckless is ignoring injustice because it's inconvenient. Reckless is letting people treat others like objects in my hotel. Another board member frowned. This isn't about ethics. It's about image. Omar's eyes hardened. Then maybe our image needs to change. The room went silent. He had never spoken like that before. Not to them, not to anyone. After the meeting, his assistant handed him a trembling phone. Sir, the media is waiting outside. Hundreds of them. He nodded. Let them in. Within an hour, the grand lobby of the Al-Zahir International Hotel was packed with flashing cameras and murmuring reporters. Omar stepped onto the marble stage, dressed simply. No tie, no jewelry, just truth in his eyes. Good afternoon, he began, voice steady. I've seen the rumors, the stories, the lies. So let's make something clear. Every camera pointed forward. Yes, I spoke to a woman named Alia Johnson. She works here, and she saved my mother's life. Yes, I defended her from a guest who insulted her. And if that offends anyone in this room, then you're part of the problem. The crowd buzzed. One reporter shouted, Are you admitting a personal relationship with her? Omar paused, then smiled faintly. Relationship? No, not in the way you're hoping to sell it. But I respect her more than half. The men who sit in boardrooms pretending to be civilized. Gasps, murmurs, a few nervous laughs. He continued, When I called her stupid weeks ago, she answered me in perfect Arabic, and in that moment I realized who the real fool was. Me. The words hit the air like thunder. Every journalist froze, pens halfway through sentences. He took a deep breath. I don't need to hide behind silence anymore. Alia taught me something my wealth never could, humility. And if that's newsworthy, then publish it everywhere. He stepped down from the podium, ignoring the storm of questions behind him. Outside, the desert wind blew softly against the glass doors. Meanwhile, Alia watched the entire press conference from her phone. Standing behind the cafe counter, her hands trembled as she heard his words. Every syllable carrying sincerity she never expected. One of her co-workers whispered, "He really said that? About you?" Aliyah nodded slowly, tears glistening in her eyes. Not tears of pity or confusion, but of recognition. The next morning, the headlines changed tone. Arab CEO's speech goes viral. A message about dignity and respect. From arrogance to accountability. Omar Al-Zahir's public redemption. The world began to see her name too, not as gossip but as grace. For once, truth was louder than noise. That evening, Omar received a short message on his phone. "You didn't have to do that, but thank you." "Aliyah," he smiled softly. "I did," he replied. Because silence would have been cowardice, and for the first time in years, he felt lighter, not because the world forgave him, but because he forgave himself. Weeks passed. The storm of headlines began to fade, replaced by silence. Not the heavy kind, but peaceful. Aliyah continued her shifts quietly. People treated her differently now. Some with admiration, others with envy. But she stayed the same, graceful, grounded. Omar, meanwhile, withdrew from the spotlight. He refused interviews, declined brand partnerships. He had said what needed to be said. And now, he let his actions speak instead. He ordered a new internal policy for all Al-Zahir establishments. No employee shall be disrespected based on race, status, or background. Violators will be banned immediately. It was the first of its kind in Dubai's luxury sector. But despite all his victories, one thing still felt unfinished. He hadn't seen Aliyah since the scandal ended. Until one evening, he found himself walking toward the small cafe again. The same one where she had once poured him coffee with quiet defiance. She was there, arranging flowers, her hands moving gently, her presence calm as dawn. When she looked up, her eyes softened, surprised but not startled. "Mr. Al-Zahir," she said, smiling faintly. "No cameras today?" "None," he replied. "Just me." They stood in a silence that felt full, of everything they hadn't said yet. He finally spoke. "You were right." "About what?" "That kindness isn't weakness. That respect can rebuild even the ruins of pride." Aliyah tilted her head. "And you? Have you rebuilt?" He smiled. "I'm still learning. But you were the start of that." She looked down, then said quietly, "You didn't owe me anything, Omar." He shook his head. "I didn't do it for debt. I did it for truth. Because for the first time in my life, someone looked at me, not as a CEO, not as a names, but as a man. And that changed everything." A faint warmth flickered in her expression. "Then I'm glad you finally met yourself." They both laughed softly, the kind of laughter that carries relief instead of noise. He handed her a small envelope. Inside was a letter of recommendation, sealed with the company's crest. "I know you said you're here to finish what you started," he said. "But when you do, I want the world to see what you're capable of. There's a scholarship fund in your name, the Aliyah Johnson Foundation, for women working in service to study business and hospitality management." She froze. "You didn't." "I did," he interrupted gently. "It's my apology and in my gratitude." Tears welled in her eyes. "Why me?" she whispered. "Because," he said, voice low, "you taught me what no one else ever could. How to speak the language of respect." Months later, the foundation became a symbol of change. Not just for women, but for dignity. Omar continued his quiet work, his empire steadier, his heart lighter. And every year, on the anniversary of his mother's recovery, a letter would arrive at his office. Always handwritten, always signed the same way. "Keep learning. Aliyah." He'd smile every time. No grand romance, no fairy tale ending. Just two souls who crossed paths long enough to remind the world, and each other, that sometimes the most powerful love story is respect itself.